All right, so today we're going to do a project analysis, and one that I think you guys are going to be interested in, one we've talked about before, is getting into decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs. And PieDAO is a project that we've been watching for a little bit and wanted to kind of dive in a little deeper. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back to TechPath. Joining me today is Anastasiya Belyaeva, who is one of the head of growth people over at PieDAO. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Paul. It's great to be here.
Okay, Anastasiya, let's get into a little bit about PieDAO in general as the project itself, the organization, kind of how this got going, what was kind of the mission, what does the team look like? Kind of give me a rundown of where you guys are today.
Yeah, for sure. So PieDAO is something I joined around a year ago, and it's something that's focusing on the idea that wealth creation is something that should be accessible to a wider audience and not just to what has historically been the 1%. If you think about in traditional markets, and specifically it's something very familiar to me coming from Crimea, that disputed region between Russia and Ukraine, where you see a lot of the wealth inequality, you see how these things are misaligned. The idea that wealth needs to be, wealth creation needs to be something that anyone can benefit from is at the heart of PieDAO. And so the idea is that you can use the DeFi mechanisms to accumulate wealth, such as using various pools to mine liquidity, all of that sort of stuff can be used by a wider amount of people without the necessity of time, expertise, and money to start off from. So that's kind of what PieDAO is trying to tackle.
With decentralized organizations or autonomous organizations, when you look at DAOs in general and kind of I think the evolution, because we've seen DeFi have its day in the sun. We've seen a lot of explosion in the DeFi space. Obviously, right now it's metaverse, NFT gaming, et cetera. Many of the projects that we cover here on the channel. But DAOs are one that are very new to a lot of the blockchain audience that are out there. Explain how an organization like PieDAO is structured, because some people will look at it, is this a true DAO, or is this a derivative of what maybe a DAO will be in the future? Because there's a lot of people that are talking about this in the sense that you've got, I mean, many people look at this as really it's like programmable companies. In essence, you have the capability of really kind of changing the structure of how organizations are put together, especially around governance. So how does that apply to what you guys are doing?
That's actually a very important question. I'm glad you asked that. The concept of DAOs is something that was started back in, I think, 2017 by a team at Aragon, which was the first organization focusing on creating the infrastructure for DAOs and sort of trying to help make that happen. And since then, a bunch of these DAOs have been spinning out with the idea that if you want to create novel ways for wealth creation, for organization, you cannot really use the old tools for that. Companies in the Web2 world are way too outdated in the sense that, think about the hiring process, think about the decision-making structure. You tend to have people who have very similar work. You probably go a very exclusive hiring process, like you're looking for top universities on their CVs, you're looking for, investment banking experience, if it's something within the investment sphere. Certainly to people having very, very similar worldviews, and therefore decision-making that is kind of within the box, right? And so the idea of DAOs is that it doesn't need to be that way. It can be a bunch of people spread out across the globe. They can be anonymous. They can be pretty much anyone. It can be a teacher. It can be a homeless person. It can be an investment professional. All of these people who have super different backgrounds, expertise, and interests are combined to give you a whole different perspective. And so that's a very powerful tool, right? From a human diversification perspective. On the other hand, of course, you have all of these benefits of not needing to have a legal entity, the flexibility around that, and of course the programmability that you mentioned, right? So you can structure a whole bunch of things like objectives and key results, right? Where typically you have these boring meetings and you have a sheet where you're tracking performances and stuff like that. You can program a bunch of these things to be much more trackable, rewardable, and kind of like make this organization work much smoother. I think we're still working on a bunch of these things. A lot of them are not yet accessible to the full level, but since 2017, the space of DAOs has progressed so much. And PieDAO is indeed a DAO, and it's been that way since its inception back in the early 2021. So it started off as a community of people, spread out across the world. Currently, it's over 6,000 members, if I'm not mistaken, today. So it's pretty large. It's one of the biggest DAOs actually out there. And the idea is that the process of getting to become a member is very inclusive. So anyone can just get a hold of the governance token, DAO, and start contributing. You can join the Discord channel. You can start contributing to discussions on the forum, and you can start making decisions on behalf of the organization. That's the idea.
So okay, so I didn't realize that was one of the largest DAOs that has been created. So that's interesting in the essence of how DAO and decentralized autonomous organizations are really going to be structured in the future. Do you see, I guess, as being involved in the DAO, you probably see that kind of being the future of how maybe finance might be worked into the next era, especially as we see DeFi evolve, because I think a lot of people are looking at DeFi as kind of the end-all be-all to kind of restructure how the finance game is done. But a lot of people are now looking at DAOs being the potential really end game for this, and how this really might be a big factor in how, especially in terms of raising money. I mean, if you look at what Constitution DAO did just here recently, even though it was an unsuccessful scenario, the idea was right in the sense of, back to your point of being able to give pretty much anyone the chance at really building wealth. And that was kind of the concept behind what Constitution DAO was trying to do in terms of bidding for an asset that eventually would go out there and be, governed by the autonomous organization, as opposed to, a traditional investment house and those kind of things. Do you see that? How do you see DAOs infiltrating business in, say, the next 5 years? What major markets do you think DAOs would have the most impact in really kind of shaking up in terms of generalized business if we looked at, everyday business today?
So I'm glad you mentioned what happened with the Constitution DAO. It's actually super interesting. If you think about one of the most beautiful things that allows for is you have now created a community of people around a very specific purpose, and they have a set of shared values. And even if you fail in a specific objective that was set out in the beginning, you're still left with a community, right? You're still left with a very, very powerful community of people around shared values. And now with the DAOs, it's not just a forum. It's not just, like in Web 2, you would have a bunch of people in the chat room. You actually have people with an ability to raise money. And now you suddenly have a large community, a bunch of wealth. And that becomes a very powerful player, right? Even in the political scene. So if you think about it, I think these DAOs can, over time, I think on a pretty short scale, become potentially international players that any UN country members, etc., will kind of have to really deal with and have conversation with, at least on a political scene as well. So it's not just business. I think it's even broader than that. But in a business sense, I think obviously, the financial space is going to be one of them. As you mentioned, DeFi is definitely one that's benefiting hugely from it. And I think, one of the biggest reasons for it is specifically the diversity of opinions and the inclusivity of the process. I think, today the phenomenon we're facing is this kind of concept of social micro-investing, like we've seen with microblogging and shifting away from large publications owning the space to people tweeting out their opinions, starting blogs, all of that sort of stuff. I think we're experiencing something similar with the concept of micro-investing. The younger generation, people who no longer want to follow large monolithic institutions with super centralized structures and very exclusive processes. They really want to follow these things the way they do Instagram or Snapchat or Twitter. They want to join a community, be able to have a say in what this investment organization is doing. Like, for example, with PieDAO, right? You can actually have a say in which areas it's going to focus on, what kind of products it will release, etc. People want to be part of the process and not just the end user that, apart from everything else, is consistently being benefited from. So there's this shift happening towards much more inclusive, much more integrated processes between a user and a governance member, which is what I really like.
Let's talk a little bit about just in general the the tokenomics in this particular case, the donomics of how PieDAO works. And as a member of PieDAO, what's in it for me? How would I be kind of isolated in terms of being able to start to really build wealth? What's the process there on the donomics side?
So that's a great question. There's two sides of it, right? So on one hand, if you want to, you can be just a user, in which case you can buy one of the products, one of the diversified portfolios that PieDAO is working on called Pies. And on
Yep.
the other hand, if you're into being a governance member, as you mentioned, then what you're interested in is DOE, which is this governance token that is at the heart of the whole ecosystem. And what's interesting is it's super simple, right? You can buy it off the market, you can go to any exchange, get a hold of it, and that gives you this window into everything that's going on behind the scenes. You can join the forum, you can join Discord, as I've mentioned earlier, and start kind of getting a sense of what problems the community is working on, what products are being contemplated, etc. And DOE is this token that gives you access to decision making power, not directly though. So that's actually an interesting change that we've done recently. One of the problems that DAOs face is the problem of participation and the problem of free riding. So if you make it super simple and inclusive for anyone to join, then inevitably one of the backlashes of it is that there's going to be a bunch of people who don't do anything and benefit from the work of others, right, by just holding that token. So we've been thinking for a long time how to mitigate that problem. How do we make sure that we keep the process inclusive? Anyone can join, anyone can become a member, and yet you try to maximize participation and encourage people to really be an active member of this DAO. And so what we've come up with is the way of converting DOE, the governance token, into something we call VDOE, vested DOE. And that is the one that actually gives you the power to both make decisions for the organization and also share all of the fees and all of the revenues generated by the organization. So that's the interesting part, right? The way it works is, let's say, imagine you have 100, 200 DOE. You want to be an active participant, you want to share the profits, you want to make decisions. You convert that pretty simply. You just lock in that DOE in exchange for VDOE with a choice of 6 months up to 3 years, whatever you prefer. And then the longer the lockup that you make, so therefore the more committed you are to the organization, the larger is your voting power and the larger your paycheck. So the larger the percentage of the revenues of the DAO that you get each month. So that's super interesting, right? This kind of makes sure that you can become pretty much a full-time member of the organization and get a salary for it, pretty much. So instead of just working with the hope that one day the token is going to appreciate in value,
Right.
every month you will receive a paycheck that consists of the revenues of the DAO, your percentage of it, right? So you're going to receive something into your wallet that represents the success of the entire organization. So you can pretty much quit your job and become a full-time DAO member these days, which I think is a pretty cool thing. And you can work anywhere. You could be somewhere in the beach in I don't know, in Hawaii or whatever, and contribute to DAO governance process, and get your paycheck.
I like, and this is quite a bit different than traditional DeFi, where in DeFi, obviously, whether you're leveraging, farming, staking, et cetera, there's typically no governance involved in that, which is really kind of I think the elegance of what a DAO brings to a new structure of investing. I was looking at your Pi Vaults. So I dropped onto your website. I'm looking here at the index, some of the ones that you've got in here. And example, this play index right here, which you've done, which is a metaverse NFT index, and the group in which you've got your allocations built in, which are a lot of the big projects that we invest in, and not only invest in, but talk about quite a bit here on the show. Here's my question is, with this kind of structure, do you feel, I guess, with the kind of people that would be traditionally going in and jumping into PieDAO, as opposed to going the traditional route? Because in many cases, a lot of early investors in blockchain, maybe they've never even had a MetaMask wallet to be able to get to some of these Binance Smart Chain projects. Maybe they don't even want to get to other alternative projects outside Coinbase and some of those. Is that where you see some of the market jumping into what PieDAO is trying to do?
So if I were to segment the market, there's people who are completely new to crypto, who've never had a wallet, who have no idea how to interact with it.
Right.
That's the type of people that we might target in the future once we have accumulated enough bandwidth and enough team members, enough resources to educate them on how to do such things. That's the ultimate sweet spot. Mm-hmm. Currently, what we're focusing on is actually the widest aspect of the widest category of the market, and that is people who have interacted with crypto, who have a wallet, but who just don't have neither the expertise, not time, nor the money to make multiple transactions on buying
Right.
small amounts of different tokens. And that's where we come in, right? So instead of creating a portfolio individually of a bunch of different assets within the NFT space, the gaming space, DeFi, where they have to do research, they have to be on Twitter probably 24/7 to be able to catch the right opportunities, and they have to spend a bunch of money on transactions to accumulate that portfolio.
Yep.
And on top of which, if they want to benefit from passive investing, like for example, any yield that these assets can generate for them, they would have to, of course, research that further and make further transactions, etc. PieDAO kind of tries to simplify that and is trying to make sure that these mechanisms, the DeFi native mechanisms, are something regular humans can do, right? So what you can do is basically you get onto the PieDAO Pies page, you choose the portfolio you like. Let's say you're very risk averse and you want to do something like BCP, which is BTC, ETH, and DeFi assets in equal percentages. You get a hold of that, and then suddenly you have this overall exposure to crypto with underlying strategies where in the DeFi part, whatever assets can generate yield will do so in the background, and you don't even need to worry about that. And so it makes it pretty simple for those people to get exposure to assets. On the other hand, if you want something that's a bit more niche and a bit more hot in the ecosystem, like Play indeed that you mentioned, which is the portfolio of NFT and gaming assets, you can do that as well. So the benefit here, I think, is that PieDAO can be very reactive to what's going on in the crypto ecosystem, being completely community driven with a bunch of members who are very DeFi nerds, to say the least. You really have that most topical stuff being very quickly reflected in the portfolio. So I think that's really the sweet spot for us.
Yeah. In looking at the different portfolios, a lot of these projects, I mean, we cover them on a constant basis, and you're exactly right. Sometimes it is, it's a full-time job for us, and we have multiple team members constantly doing research around the world, and just to keep up with this, much like what you guys are doing, to be able to go in and invest in it from a portfolio standpoint. With that being the case, because this could be, especially as a DAO, I think is really kind of the future of where maybe this kind of investing is going to be going, especially in the idea of governance. Explain to me how the governance voting process works. If I were to have enough DAO in my engagement with PieDAO, what is the governance process? How does it work for me if I'm brand new to PieDAO?
Yeah. So right now, since we've launched this new updated governance model that includes veto that I described earlier, the first thing you'd need to do is get a hold of that. So you would need to lock in your DAO, get your veto, which you receive equivalent amount of, and that's what gives you the governance power. And in terms of the decision making, so your first step would probably be getting to understand what issues are being discussed, and that is Discord. And you can join community calls, you can join in various discussions that we have going on in there. Once there's something that's taking shape and getting enough support and getting clear opinions, that gets transported to the forum where proposals are clearly formulated with very specific pros and cons and details and all of that sort of stuff, where you can express your opinions and you can vote first just sort of on the Web 2 aspect of that on the forum. And then finally, you can vote on Snapshot, which is this gasless voting tool where you don't actually need to make an on-chain vote just yet. You don't have to use any gas. You can just express your opinion using the veto that you have and therefore the weight that it carries on Snapshot to support whichever discussion is going on. And then that just gets transported on chain with Aragon, which is the platform we're using for the DAO. And then the vote gets solidified on mainnet. That's the idea. Of course, whenever any funds need to be moved or anything like that, it needs to happen on mainnet. That's currently the structure.
Yeah, I was looking at the Twitter account, and so just in the ability to kind of expand on this a little bit, because I think a lot of people, once they get their head around what a DAO can do, it starts to really kind of open up a lot of possibilities in the future. And I was just looking here on Linear Finance, submitting a proposal and basically trying to do a synthetic listing version of your Play portfolio, which I thought this is an intriguing idea to go in this direction. Do you find a lot of people are going and doing this right now? You know, many more linear finances out there that would be submitting to you, meaning the DAO itself, to kind of create these derivatives that would fall off of these projects like this?
Definitely, I think it's a very interesting space to go into, and we've done this one so far. It's a partnership with Linear Finance, which seems to have worked pretty well, and we're definitely open to doing more with them in the future. I think it's interesting, and it's obviously covering a different type of assets. You don't need to have the assets in reserves, so they're not collateralized, they are synthetic, which makes it, of course, much simpler, and you don't have the same bottlenecks as you would have with fully collateralized assets. So I think it's a very interesting road to go down, and yeah, I think what Linear guys are doing is super interesting. We have had some more discussions with them on other PieDAO pies to kind of mimic within the linear synthetic assets. So I think we'll be looking to do more of that in the future for sure.
Yeah, very, very flexible in the sense of how DAOs I think will grow in the future. Anastasia, do you see, because I think this has been a challenge, I think that many people are looking at DAOs, and maybe especially here in the United States, if you look back at what Constitution DAO was trying to do you see regulatory scenarios coming into play? Because I think a lot of people would look at this as, you know, yes, there are investment scenarios coming into play. This could be considered a security, but in the fact, since it is a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, it falls outside the governance of most regulatory means. So do you think that is something that will deter DAO expansion, or do you feel like regulators in general worldwide will do kind of a hands-off approach toward DAOs?
It's a great question. I mean, to be honest, I would love to know the answer to that myself. I'm not a lawyer by any means, so it's hard to have an opinion here. So far, what we've been seeing is that DAOs have been seen either neutrally or positively, right? There's some states where they're getting a treatment like legal entities, and they're getting a very positive treatment in the US, for example. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I think that just because of the benefit they give and how fast growth can be, and obviously how much financial value they can generate, I hope that regulators will find it beneficial to find ways to help them continue growing. So far, I don't think we've seen any slowing in growth due to any concerns from a regulatory nature. So yeah, let's see how that's going to evolve. But yeah, hopefully it will continue growing positively the way it has been.
Yeah. I want to jump into one other aspect of your website here, and that is the oven category, which I thought was interesting in itself. But when you go into the site itself, you've got the different product aspects, obviously the indices, the exchanges, and then you go into the ovens side of it, where you're actually in the different portfolios themselves. Explain how this works. What's the process? I deposit some ETH. I know it says right here, wait and then withdraw your pie, but how does that come together and work in terms of building, and generating profits?
Yeah, so this has been one of our users' favorites, I think, since day one. So the idea behind ovens is that when you have these portfolios of assets, in theory, you have two ways of getting a hold of them. You either can buy the existing portfolio, let's say Play or BCP, right, of an exchange, or you can buy the underlying assets and then mint them into the portfolio, right? So these are the two ways. So when you have low liquidity, when you're just launching an asset and you want to bootstrap it and you want to have more people get their hands on it, it can be quite tricky. You're sort of excluding a whole bunch of people who are not prepared to pay fees for buying what can be 16 different assets like in play, and then converting them all into a portfolio. So what the oven does is it basically kind of puts together transactions from a bunch of people into one, right? So what you can do is you can share the transaction costs together with other people and have all of that be done in one step. So you convert, let's say, your ETH into whatever are the assets underlying in a particular pie, and you just get your pie in the end. So that's pretty convenient, and that does indeed save, I think, up to 97% currently. So that's pretty handy given the current gas prices. So yeah, users are loving it so far.
Well, especially with gas fees on ETH, that's the big issue right now. A lot of people are kind of actually shying away from ETH transactions, even when projects they really love, because ETH might be the only vehicle of exchange there. You can't necessarily do get it over on a swap, or there's different ways to maybe even go into layer 2. But this would be, I think, a very fascinating way to do it, in the sense of really, especially drilling down in the cost of these transactions. How long does it take investors, if I said, hey, I want to jump into and build a pie here, or bake a pie here, in essence, what's the process, and how long would that take me if I wanted to invest in that before I'd see the actual investment take place?
So typically, if you would participate in the oven process, it would be done within a day. It's something where, let's say you deposit somewhere in the morning, and then towards the afternoon or so, it should be there. Of course, it depends. Some days it can be even faster. It can be boom, boom. Each hour there's a pie baking. If there's a lot of interest, maybe something on Twitter drew attention, people are going into it. Sometimes it can take a little bit longer, but on average, I would say within a day, you should have your portfolio right there. Obviously, if you want to do it faster, you can just do it directly, right? Like if you want to, catch a specific price, if you want to do it faster, you can just go on and buy that directly, avoiding the oven.
Yeah, popularity-wise, obviously the play portfolio at 38% right now on minimum reached. It looks like that one's getting ready to pop out of the oven soon. So, so you can sit there and watch these really kind of start to fill up and then roll out into an asset for you. So interesting stuff. Okay, so last question for you, and that is, as you see this kind of this new conversion of how wealth is being built around the world, what do you feel are going to be the key things that DAOs will have to overcome in the future, especially as, because as people start to understand them? I think still right now it's very early days, early adopters understand them. Shows like ours really kind of try to bring these things to light. But once they get to mainstream, where do you think the biggest, hurdles will be, and how would you overcome some of those?
So a lot of people think that DAOs, just by the nature of this new technology, will magically have things done, right? From decision, or from a discussion on a forum, over to execution, these things will magically happen. That's obviously a myth that we're going to have to drill down into. Now, when you have a big community, it's both an advantage and a massive difficulty. When you have a community of thousands of people or hundreds of thousands of people, of course, a lot of brilliant ideas will be floating around, but you need to make sure these ideas get brought from discussion to execution with maximum structure, without leading to a centralized top-down approach. So that is the difficulty, and that's what we are trying to figure out. There's a bunch of projects trying to solve that with very specific approaches. If you're familiar with, for example, UMA, who do their KPI options, which is a super interesting tool to incentivize a large community of people towards a very specific quantifiable target, by basically airdropping this KPI token that says, effectively, if you as a community reach, let's say, 100 million of TVL of this project, then your KPI token will convert to this much of your own token, right? And that way, obviously, you all get rewarded for helping achieve that goal. So I think that's a very powerful mechanism, and we're seeing more and more of these emerge. More projects are now starting to tackle things like kind of creating these bounty systems and dashboards that reflect bounties and tasks within different DAOs, where you can tackle something, Make sure that you submit proof that it's been tackled and get your payout for doing that specific task, which is pretty interesting. We're kind of moving away from the concept of jobs being these holistic things where you're filling in the entire job description of, I don't know, marketing or engineering or whatever, towards something that's more bounty based and specific task based, where you can pick up, okay, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do that in 2 days, and I'll get my payout for that, which is also very interesting, and it helps move the needle forward much faster. So I think that's a very big one to overcome. And I think once we're able to sort of maximize the efficiency of these large communities and structure them in a way where stuff gets done, we'll see things move much faster.
Yeah, excellent stuff. Anastasiya, great having you on the show today. Thanks so much for stopping in. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Paul. It was a pleasure. Great to be here.
Excellent. Yes. All right, so you guys are listening in over on the podcast right now. Make sure and give us some kudos over there. We love it, but right here is the place, and that is our YouTube channel. And it's easy to find us. Just search Paul Barron Network, and of course you can subscribe, hit the bell for update and notifications for our live streams, all that good stuff. Don't forget to sign in and join into the Diamond Circle. It's really easy and simple to do that. We do airdrops. We also do a ton of drops on education. And best of all, we do a lot of our Crypto Power Index analysis in there as well. So you don't want to miss any of that. If you want to reach me out on Twitter, it's just @PaulBarron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.